afternoon for the third time. Glad you're all here today. It gives me a great deal of honor to introduce Erin Curtis, the Gabrielle Dongles Winkler Director of the Ruth Williamson Gallery. And she's going to introduce Rosalia today to us. And I really want to thank Erin and her staff for the wonderful collaboration we're developing with each other, and grateful for the opportunity to have some of our programs here in the gallery. So, Erin. And again, thanks to Suzanne Mutznick for sponsoring our program today.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Bring that down because I'm a little short. Thank you so much for braving the weather to be here. On behalf of the Williamson Gallery, I am delighted to welcome you to today's talk with Rosalia Romero. Before we dive in, I also want to echo Sally's thanks to Suzanne Mutznick for sponsoring today's program. We're very grateful to you, Suzanne. And also offer special thanks to the members of the Scripps Fine Arts Foundation for your partnership, which has made wonderful programs like this possible at the Williamson Gallery. Your support has been essential not only for this event, but also for realizing this current exhibition, Pintor de Poemas, Unseen Works by Alfredo Ramos Martínez, and its companion publication. This exhibition and today's conversation are especially meaningful as we approach the 80th anniversary of the beloved mural in the Margaret Fowler Memorial Garden, which is Las Vendedoras de Flores, or the Flower Vendors. As our catalog for this exhibition notes, 8 decades ago, the Fine Arts Foundation played a central role in bringing this work to Scripps. In September 1945, the Fine Arts Foundation hosted a Ramos Martínez exhibition in the Lang Art Gallery at the college, and Ramos Martínez himself spoke at that opening. And right around that time, in the fall of 1945, Millard Sheets invited Ramos Martínez to paint that mural in the Fowler Garden. The Fine Arts Foundation voted to, and I quote from the meeting minutes that I found over in Denison Library, to enthusiastically support to the fullest extent this undertaking, end quote, and they immediately began raising funds to make the mural happen. It has meant so much to me personally to see that commitment continue today through the Fine Arts Foundation's very generous support of Pintor de Poemas, which offers a reappraisal of Ramos Martínez's legacy, as well as of the Flower Vendors. So we're very grateful for this enduring relationship and to co-present this program, which explores several recently discovered drawings by Ramos Martínez that are featured in the show. And so now I will introduce our speaker. Rosalia Romero is an assistant professor in the Department of Art History at Pomona College. Her research focuses on the art and visual culture of modern and contemporary Mexico and the US-Mexico borderlands. She is also an active curator of contemporary art. Her most recent exhibition was the 2022-23 Mexicali Biennial, held at various venues in California and in Baja California, Mexico, including the Cheech Marine Center for Chicano Art and Culture in Riverside. She is currently writing her first book about the relationship between anarchism and modern art in early 20th century Mexico. So please welcome Rosalia Romero.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Erin. And thank you all for coming to today's talk, especially in this inclement weather that we're having. Very unusual for this time of year, but I'm delighted to speak to you about the Mexican painter, muralist, and educator, Alfredo Ramos Martínez. And I was especially excited to learn that Ramos Martínez himself spoke to the Scripps Fine Art Foundation about 80 years ago in 1945, and that your foundation played a pivotal role in bringing such an esteemed Mexican painter to campus. And commissioned his mural at the Margaret Fowler Garden. My talk today is about some of the research that I've done on Ramos Martínez's art from the early 1930s, right after he moved from Mexico City to Los Angeles. I should say that until this year, I had not actually done serious research on this artist. I teach him in my courses on Latin American and Latinx art, and every semester, I always take my students to see the flower vendor's mural. But I had not spent much time studying him or his art. My own research is about anarchism and modern art in Mexico, and it covers the early 20th century when Ramos Martínez was in his prime. I focus on many of his peers and students, but he was not a central actor in leftist political movements of the time, so my book doesn't directly kind of engage with his work. So when the exhibition curators, Erin and Robin, invited me to contribute an essay to this exhibition, they shared a list of artworks that were going to be part of the show. And these two mural sketches from around 1932 immediately jumped out at me. So you see, my understanding of Ramos Martínez's work up until recently was based on his reputation as a decorative painter, a painter of women and flowers, and scenes of Mexican rural life, like you see in the mural of Indigenous female flower vendors at the Fowler Garden. But Erin and Robin showed me preparatory sketches for a mural about industrial labor, a mural that depicted construction workers in an urban landscape. The sketches were unknown until a few years ago when they were discovered in the family home. So I was very excited to learn more about these works and to write about them because they look so different from what I and other scholars typically associate with Ramos Martínez. I was also very drawn to Erin and Robin's vision for the exhibition of not only introducing the public to unseen works by the artist, but doing so to initiate new discussions about Ramos Martínez and support new lines of inquiry about the artist's politics. He's been largely framed as an apolitical artist whose works are devoid of significant political statements. In comparison to his peer artists like Diego Rivera and David Alfaro Siqueiros, who joined the Mexican Communist Party in the 1920s and whose art and actions directly addressed strong political beliefs, Ramos Martínez never joined any political groups, neither leftist nor conservative, and he didn't leave behind any writings that evidence his opinions on political matters. He did, however, leave us his art, the works on view in this gallery. And so it is from his art that we can interpret what he may have believed and stood for. And we can contextualize his work in relation to the important moments in history that he not only lived through, but also responded to through his art. So now returning to these two artworks, Ramos Martínez never painted the mural of urban laborers that these sketches proposed, but they still present exciting avenues for new research on the artist. They allow us to see a different side of the artist not previously known. So to my knowledge, these are the only examples of Ramos Martínez depicting this particular subject matter, namely urban industrial labor and the modern cityscape. They allow us to see him responding to the work of Diego Rivera and Siqueiros and working through popular perceptions of Mexican art to push expectations of his own work. So more specifically, I think that there are two broader conclusions to be made about these sketches and Ramos Martínez's practice. So first, his mural sketches reflect a shift in how workers were depicted in modern Mexican art because they center on construction workers themselves. So before the 1930s, Mexican artists had depicted urban and industrial scenes. And so you see here on the left an important work by Ramos Martínez's student, Fernando Leal. But like Leal in this painting, most artists did not include workers in their art. Instead, They had largely aestheticized and idealized the built environment of urban modernity. Skyscrapers, factories, railways, and technologies of industrial modernization, leaving workers absent from these scenes. And second, I think that these sketches reveal the influence of a Mexican avant-garde movement called Estridentismo, or stridentism, directly on Ramos Martínez's art practice. Fernando Leal was a founding member of the Stridentist movement, which celebrated the experience of the modern city and technological advancements and positioned its cosmopolitan orientation against the nationalization of Mexican art. Now, Ramos Martínez was not a Stridentist artist, but his mural sketches show us how the younger avant-garde generation of Mexican artists may have influenced him. And so before turning to his mural sketches, let me provide some background on Ramos Martínez. So notably, he was born in 1871 in Monterrey, Mexico. He was an academically trained artist who began his education in 1890 at the National School of Fine Arts, Mexico's premier art school that is located in Mexico City. He was a student that showed great promise, and in 1900, he was financially supported by the American philanthropist Phoebe Apperson Hearst to further his studies in Paris. And so he arrives in Paris in 1900, and he spent 10 years in the French capital. And while there, he was introduced to Impressionist paintings and post-Impressionist art. And this work, from this time, bears the influence of painters such as Claude Monet. So you can see the resemblance here between Monet's painting on the left and Ramos Martínez's on the right. Both paintings share a cool color palette. They have the same subject matter of women and children, a typical French scene. And as is common in Impressionist paintings, the animated brushstrokes signal a rapid painting technique. And notably, both artists would have painted outside. Now, while in Paris, Ramos Martínez enters a circle of Latin American artists and writers who are interested in synthesizing European modernist styles, from Impressionism to Post-Impressionism and symbolism. But they're doing so in order to adapt those styles to their own cultural and artistic traditions. So after he returns to Mexico in 1910, he begins teaching at the National Art School. And it's around this time when his reputation for creating very serene, decorative paintings is established. And so in 1916, a review of his work for the Mexico City newspaper called Revista de Revistas hailed him as the, quote, painter of women and flowers. This is a reputation that would stay with him through the end of his life. And so indeed, his last great work was the mural of Indigenous women selling flowers at the Fowler Garden. But he adapts European modernist styles to particular Mexican subject matter, right? Such as in this 1917 portrait of an Indigenous soldier during the Mexican Revolution. At the National School of Fine Arts, Ramos Martínez would become widely respected by a younger generation of artists that were being educated at the school. Many would consider him the, quote, father of Mexican modernism, and they would credit him for introducing some of the most advanced art ideas from Paris, introducing them to Mexico. And so as you can see in this painting, he was also an early advocate for outdoor painting, right? A practice that flew in the face of standard academic practice at the time, which was based on rigorous studio work indoors, working with models and copying from old master paintings. Now, at the Art Academy, he would support a 9-month student strike that takes place in 1911, when students revolted against the Academy's outdated pedagogy and painted outdoors at public parks and plazas in Mexico City as part of their striking activities. Ramos Martínez became the students' preferred choice for a new director at the Academy. And among the group of students who supported him were José Clemente Orozco, the artist behind the Prometheus mural at Ferry Dining Hall, and David Alfaro Siqueiros, who are pictured here on the left of the photograph. Now, Ramos Martínez was named director of the Academy in 1913. His lasting legacy was the establishment of the so-called open-air painting schools. These were art schools set up on the outskirts of Mexico City that encouraged students to paint the Mexican landscape and its rural population, to paint what they saw and experienced firsthand. A younger generation of avant-garde artists and mural painters, including David Alfaro Siqueiros and Fernando Leal, attended these schools, which also provided art education to unskilled workers, rural children, and Indigenous students who had previously not been welcomed in the Art Academy. Now, these schools were very successful. They experienced some disruptions during the Mexican Revolution, but through the 1920s, the system of schools expanded. But then, in 1928, Ramos Martínez found himself at the center of growing tensions in the Academy between conservative faculty and young instructors and students, many of them affiliated with this emerging avant-garde movement that was known as Estridentismo, or stridentism. Both sides proposed a radical restructuring of the Academy, but in different ways. The conservative faculty called for Ramos Martínez's open-air painting schools to close. Diego Rivera penned the text for this 1928 poster calling for the resignation of those conservative faculty. He also called for the autonomy of the open-air painting schools and urged the Academy to create an art program that would serve directly the Mexican people. Now, Ramos Martínez signed this letter, and his name is actually listed at the bottom. He signed it perhaps because he thought it would calm some of the mounting pressures at the Academy and that it would save the open-air painting schools. But unfortunately, that plan didn't work. So in 1928, he was ousted from his role as director of the Academy in Mexico City. And it's after this that Ramos Martínez left his home in Mexico and migrated to the United States. Before he settles in Los Angeles, he spent some time in New York. And New York City was likely the inspiration for these mural sketches here. Now, Ramos Martínez had not painted any murals in Mexico. It was in the United States that he first took up muralism. And the experts at the Ramos Martínez Research Project have dated these works to about 1913, which means that they are some of the first mural proposals created by the artist once he is settled in California. Now, the four sketches accentuate different figures and features of urban industrial modernization. Right? We have construction workers and capitalists, cement bags and scaffolds, skyscrapers and smokestacks, highways and railways. Ramos Martínez likely envisaged the four sketches as part of one mural cycle. Each varies in size and scale, as though he had intended them to be individual mural panels for different sized walls. Now, formally, mural concept study titled Work is Happiness and the smaller construction workers share a common theme and style. In both sketches, the bodies of the construction workers are uniform, and they wear the same white shirts, pants, and newsboy caps. By depicting all the construction workers in the same white clothing, the artist is obscuring any possible differences or hierarchies between them at the job site. In Work is Happiness, the men are arranged symmetrically to give the composition balance and harmony. They're lean with long limbs, and they do not appear to be toiling under their work, right? Their work is effortless, it's natural, right? We don't see bulging muscles. Their work also encourages cooperation. One man raises a hammer to drive a nail into a board held up by his fellow worker, while 3 men behind them hoist up a beam. The men are mostly using their hands and basic tools to carry out their work, the hammer and wood boards. Now, construction workers, they have their hands placed on a large unmarked bag of what is most likely cement. One worker wields a shovel or a hoe used to mix concrete. This is an essential material in modernist buildings. But Ramos Martínez's sketch foregrounds the labor of the worker as a critical step in that foundation of the building, right? The foundation of the industrializing city that was and a material that was increasingly being used to create modern buildings. Mexican artists at this time often self-identified with the common laborer, right? So they saw themselves as artist workers. They would develop different strategies to fashion their image as workers. Some artists actually adopted the workers' uniform. So for example, Diego Rivera during this time would famously imitate the appearance of Mexican workers by wearing the blue overalls of unionized laborers when he painted. And that feature, that uniform, was always an integral part of the workers that he would represent in the murals that he created in San Francisco. Now, we see a similar identification with workers in Ramos Martínez's sketches. Specifically, right, he is trying to build a connection between the artist and construction workers, right? They reveal an interest in forging a connection between the materials and the equipment that are used by construction workers, cement, shovels, scaffolds, to those same tools that are also used by an artist to create a mural, right? So here you see an image of Ramos Martínez and his assistant, Shelley Horton, painting the flower vendor's mural while standing on a similar wood scaffold that he depicted in the construction workers. And so notice the ladder to the side and the curvature of the spine as the artist has to bend down to apply the pigment to the wet plaster. Now, labor and laborers were a consistent theme in Ramos Martínez's work after the artist moved to California. Many of his works, including the ones that you see in this gallery, depict campesinos, rural indigenous workers, performing different acts of labor, either artisanal or manual labor. And so we see the dominance of this subject in works across this gallery. But for example, in the painting titled The Tortilla Makers from about 1936, this is displayed next to the set of sketches of urban workers in the gallery. Now here, Ramos Martínez painted a scene of indigenous rural workers, right? A group of both male and female workers making the staple food of tortillas for a Mexican meal. The men wear all-white clothing and huaraches, which are hand-woven leather sandals, while the women have long braids, long dresses, and 3 of the male figures also wear the iconic wide-brimmed sombrero. They're all huddled around 2 important tools of pre-Columbian origin. You have the metate, which is a large flat tool made of volcanic stone and used for grinding corn. And you have that round griddle that's known as a comal. This painting exemplifies a tendency in Mexican modern art of the 1920s and 30s to relegate the campesinos' activities to the pre-Columbian past and to depict indigenous peoples performing types of labor associated with folkloric notions of Mexican culture. Ramos Martínez's works were created at a time when US perceptions of Mexican art were primarily based on idealized scenes of Mexico and its indigenous cultures. This tendency can be seen in numerous works that Ramos Martínez created after settling in Los Angeles, with indigenous laborers placed in atemporal contexts. But if we bring las tortilleras, or the tortilla makers, and construction workers in conversation with each other, as the curators have done in the layout of the gallery, we see that Ramos Martínez was in dialogue with an important distinction being developed in Mexico after the revolution, and that's a distinction between skilled and unskilled labor. Skilled labor often referred to work done in sites that were progressing the modern city. Construction zones, right? Workers building skyscrapers. Work often done by light-skinned workers and men of European heritage. This is labor that was often unionized. Unskilled labor was embodied by the indigenous workers who carried out activities designated to the country's past, right? It's nationalist culture, making tortillas, right? This was often, did not require special training, and it was often non-unionized labor. But rather than strictly reinforcing that discourse, I believe that Ramos Martínez was embracing the beauty and harmony of both types of work, right? This is a celebration of both skilled and non-skilled labor. And now to turn to my second point, I also believe that these sketches are best understood in the context of a growing fascination with the modern city and technology, especially among the avant-garde stridentism movement in Mexico in the 1920s, right? As well as Mexican artists who are having this kind of growing interest in industrial labor, right? Including construction work. And this is evolving in the 1930s. Now, Ramos Martínez is not usually associated with Mexican avant-garde movements, but Mural Concept Study New York, this reveals the influence of stridentism on his work. It also lets us see the artist's own reflections on the modern city. The cityscape in these sketches is defined by skyscrapers of varying heights, freeways and train lines, smokestacks and airships in the sky. It includes a series of overlapping lines and abstract shapes that are unique in Ramos Martínez's practice and give the work a collage-like feel. The artist is drawing rays of light that resemble those that beam from a movie industry light. And you also have swirling clouds of smoke in the sketch that are giving a sense of the city's atmospheric properties. You have a group of floating hexagrams that bisect the city's buildings. Those may recall the shapes of blimps or zeppelins, or they could even allude to a future machine, a product of Ramos Martínez's own imagination about the modern city. Now, on the left side of the drawing, of the sketch, Ramos Martínez is also including an assortment of geometric forms that assume the shape of ladders, bridges, or steel girders with bolts. Two stages of the workers' building process are depicted in the drawing. You have shadowy figures at a distance, right? They're occupying the scaffold frame of a building, and workers are balancing on ladders in the sky. These figures, and I also believe that the sketch in general, are likely references to photographs by the US photographer Louis Hine of workers balancing on steel girders during the construction of the Empire State Building in 1931, right? And so remember that Ramos Martínez, right, was in New York and likely saw, probably likely saw firsthand workers building these skyscrapers. Now, these construction workers in Ramos Martinez's concept study, they also inhabit a very compressed space, right? There's a quality that crowds the figures, but is also injecting the scene with a lot of energy, right? There's a lot going on here, and that's a kind of product of all the diagonal lines that are cutting through the plane. The sketch also resembles a very iconic 1929 illustration by Ramos Martinez's former student. His name was Fernando Leal, and he was a founding member of the Stridentist group. Leal depicted tall, prismatic buildings, telephone lines, antennas, and smokestacks in his vision of the modern city. Notably, he included a workers' protest occurring on the ground to reinforce the Stridentist belief that the metropolis was the setting for social revolution. Now, in contrast, Ramos Martinez places his worker at eye level with the city as a driver of social innovation. On opposite ends of the drawing, the artist depicted a capitalist. The capitalist is drawn with the caricatural features of a bald head, a monocle, and the aristocratic ensemble of a black tuxedo. He's also holding a briefcase or a stack of documents while puffing on a cigar. This tuxedoed man closely resembles the standing man in the boardroom table in Capitalists. These are the men that look out into a view of finished buildings and skyscrapers. Now, the worker, in contrast, wears light-colored clothing and a newsboy cap and is holding a shovel. Notably, both figures are drawn at the same height. This may suggest an attempt by Ramos Martinez to give harmony and symmetry to the mural sketch, and perhaps even to valorize the worker's contribution as equal to that of the capitalist. Echoing the Stridentists, Ramos Martinez's mural studies propose that technology and infrastructure are instruments not only for generating broader social change, but also, perhaps, for reducing divisions between classes. However, it is rather surprising that Ramos Martinez would do this during the Great Depression, a time when millions of working Americans are jobless and impoverished. However, Ramos Martinez may have seen his mural proposal as an alternative to the more overtly political and controversial output of his former students, specifically Diego Rivera and David Alfaro Siqueiros, whose murals in the US were famously caught up in scandals and censored. So if we consider Siqueiros' street meeting at the Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, this mural also had construction workers as its primary subject. It was Siqueiros' first mural in the United States, completed in July of 1932, but it was whitewashed shortly after its unveiling, likely due to its controversial portrayal of multiracial labor organizing. Siqueiros depicted a militant labor leader addressing a group of construction workers in blue overalls seated on a wooden scaffold in the exterior of a building. And you can see that they're leaning over the panel to hear the speaker. The subject matter brought labor organizing to the forefront, as anti-union practices in Los Angeles were being led by police, who would often resort to violent measures when breaking up union meetings. Now, Siqueiros' mural was controversial, in part because it depicted a biracial gathering of both African-American and white kind of tenants from the building. But also because the artist added the figure of the labor leader at center, wearing a bright red shirt, a symbol of communist ideology. Now, it's not clear if or when Ramos Martínez viewed this mural by Siqueiros before it was whitewashed. However, he would have been familiar with it, and it may have inspired his own 1932 mural studies. Now, if we look back at Work is Happiness, the two men hovering in the background of the scene wear shirts that appear to be shaded in a light red color. Right here. Not unlike the red-shirted organizer in Siqueiros' street meeting. The two men in red shirts watch over the group of laboring workers, perhaps representing the looming presence of communism in the United States. Ramos Martínez may have been attempting to take a political stance on an issue at the forefront of artistic debates, or to carve out a middle ground in representations of capitalism, communism, and labor that were unfolding in Los Angeles. So let me conclude by drawing attention to another small detail in one of the mural sketches, which piqued my interest when I first saw it. On the bottom right of this mural sketch, Ramos Martínez lightly scribbled the phrase in French, "Work is happiness," on top of the space allocated for a door. With this exclamation, the artist makes a claim about man's relationship to work being central to his fulfillment. It is embedded in a scene that depicts fraternity, collectivity, and even leisure. Perhaps the workers are on a break. In the foreground of the drawing, near the location of the text, a man sits with his back to the viewer, while a fellow worker smokes a cigarette. The two workers enjoy a moment of rest from their work, implying that leisure time is built into their day at the job site. This scene and its message contrast to that of communist-affiliated artist Siqueiros, who portrayed a construction site as a place of alienation and capitalist exploitation, as well as sites of union organizing. Now, Siqueiros and Rivera were also magnetized by the machinery and technology of modern labor and construction, such as the automobile assembly lines and pneumatic drills in Diego Rivera's murals in Detroit, and the portable fresco from the 1930s that he would create between 1931 and 1932 for his MoMA exhibition in New York. And you see here on the right. In contrast, Ramos Martínez places his workers outside. They're no longer confined to the inside, to the interior of a factory. And Ramos Martínez gives them basic tools instead of cutting-edge machinery. Ramos Martínez may not have been as overtly political as Rivera and Siqueiros, nor as aggressively anti-academic as the younger generation of avant-garde artists, including the Stridentists and his student Fernando Leal. Nevertheless, his mural sketches of construction workers from 1932, which reflect his engagement with Mexican muralism in the United States, his interest in labor as a subject of art, and aesthetic innovations proposed by the Stridentists. Now, we don't know if these sketches were for a mural commissioned by a US patron who then backed out, but they point to what might have been if Ramos Martínez had continued to develop this particular aesthetic and not simply painted women and flowers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalia. So if you have a question.
Yeah. Wasn't Diego Rivera's mural in the Rockefeller Center was white right across at the same time?
It was, yes.
Did he get to see it, do you think, before it was?
Yeah, so the question was about Diego Rivera's Rockefeller kind of mural at Rockefeller Center. It was whitewashed, kind of almost immediately after it was created, and we don't have evidence that Ramos Martínez might have seen the mural. he very likely had actually probably left New York before he was able to see it. However, that scandal, kind of made it to all of the major newspapers, and so it's very, very likely that Ramos Martinez would have known about the controversy. But Siqueiros and Ramos Martinez, their time in Los Angeles did overlap. So it is, again, we don't have evidence that, we don't have kind of direct evidence, we don't have writings by Ramos Martinez that kind of like prove that he had seen street meeting, or even if he had seen Siqueiros' America Tropical, that's at Olvera Street, that was also whitewashed. But again, right, the kind of scandal kind of made it to all the major newspapers, so it's very, very likely that he would have at least known about what was going on.
I had read, I think in some of the advertising for this presentation, that he is considered, I might have misunderstood, having some kind of art, considered an art deco artist. Could you explain how that would be?
Yeah, so I think that kind of especially if you look, I personally don't see it in the mural sketches, and the mural sketches from 1932, but it's in his much later work from the later 1930s and 1940s, where art historians have really said that the influence of Art Deco is very present. So, kind of specifically the geometry and the geometric backgrounds in, so for example, the geometric background in the tortilla kind of makers and that work, kind of right behind us. And then, so art historians kind of, when they make that, when they state that influence of Art Deco is kind of present in his work, it's usually from work that's after, kind of late 1930s, early 1940s.
So would that also include the mural in the Fowler Garden?
Yes, so that connection has been made. Yeah, and specifically, if you look at the symmetry of the women's faces, so the two panels in the Fowler Garden that have the close-up, the headshots, there I think that influence is very clear there, right? The kind of the symmetry, the geometric background, there I think we really do see the presence of Art Deco.
Because I was thinking that the relatively stiff-looking postures of a lot of his figures, as opposed to something like Art Nouveau or something more flexible and flowy. It seems to be something that even some of the decorative figures around scripts also have this relatively, I don't know, kind of masculine or sort of rigid poses. And I'm wondering if this is an Art Deco feature.
Yeah, well, I think it's also a wonderful fusion, right? Kind of artists are experimenting with multiple styles during this time, and I think that's very much the case when we're looking at Latin American artists and Latin American art movements, is that, it's very difficult to kind of classify them as kind of strictly abiding, by the principles of one movement. Ramos Martinez was I believe, a synthesizer of different art styles, and I think that we see that in the mural sketches for New York, but we also see that in a lot of the works around. But to your point about Art Deco, I think that the influence there is also based on what he saw to be a demand in the art market. So when he arrives to Los Angeles, many of his patrons are kind of Hollywood darlings, right? He's being commissioned by directors and actors to create, kind of works that will decorate their home. And Art Deco in the 1930s is very much kind of seen as this, very trendy movement. And so I think that he's kind of leaning and kind of embracing that in his work in order to really kind of appeal to his patrons. Yeah, thank you.
I have a couple things. One is the use of newsprint. And that goes back to Picasso and
It does.
collages of 1912, doesn't it?
It does.
Also, I think there's some interpretations that was connected politically to anarchism.
It was,
And so
yes.
if I go back to dig back into my literature, so I thought that's an interesting connection. And Yeah.
No, thank you so much for making, thank you so much for making that connection, yes.
And now I've got another French connection because I did my dissertation on post-impressionism, and I've been seeing some of Gauguin in some of these.
Oh, definitely.
The stylization, the simplification, the synthetic contours. So I just want to put that out.
Definitely, yeah, and kind of in doing some research and some kind of image acquisitions for this talk and specifically for this research, I was also kind of introduced to a set of drawings by Ramos Martínez that he creates in I believe it's the 1930s up until about the 1940s, where he's very directly kind of engaging with one of Gauguin's kind of most kind of favorite subject, right, the Bretones. And so Alfredo Ramos Martínez has a series of drawings on the Bretones. So yeah, thank you. And if I could just say one more thing about the newspaper, because I love that you made that connection. My colleague Armando Pulido wrote his article for the exhibition catalog, specifically about the drawings on the newsprint. And you're right, it was a very early anarchist artist kind of strategy that was kind of introduced by Picasso. But the politics of that is really in how the artist is kind of translating an image onto the discourse that's being developed in the newspaper, in the articles. And so I highly recommend my colleague Armando Pulido's essay, because he speaks directly to that in his essay for the catalog.
Hi, forgive me, I have not seen the show yet, so I haven't read all the descriptions and whatnot, but I was just wondering, how did these just become available? How did they not know that they were in the home? I mean, were they this big, or are these all blown up for us?
So I don't know the case for each of these artworks, and I think that's a much kind of better question for Erin and Robin. I'll leave it to them to kind of give the official answer. But from when in one of the first meetings that I had with Erin and Robin, they had told me that the mural sketches for the New York series had been tucked away in one of the rooms in the family home. And so it seemed as if Ramos Martínez had kind of rolled them up and kind of safely kind of placed them somewhere. And it wasn't until recently that they were discovered by kind of one of the last remaining living descendants. Now, I think that we can kind of maybe hypothesize like how and why that might have been. I might even, one thing that I was thinking about was that this particular style and subject matter is such a departure from what was expected of his work. And, kind of perhaps he, maybe he wanted them to kind of, be in a closet for a really, really long time until the moment was right for them to kind of be introduced into the world. And so, was this perhaps a, strategy of maybe self-censorship? I don't know. I think we can think all kinds of really, interesting things about that.
In the garden here at Scripps that we can go see, why were the murals not all finished? Did he die before he got a chance to finish them?
Yes, so unfortunately, Ramos Martínez passes away before he's able to finish the flower vendors. However, I think one of the really fantastic, or at least one of the decisions that was made was to not commission another artist to finish the mural. And as a professor here at the colleges, I actually want to thank the Scripps Fine Art Foundation for making that call, because it's actually a really incredible teaching tool. To be able to talk to students about the process and the technique of making a fresco mural and be able to show them the synopia layer, the intonaco layer is absolutely fantastic. So thank you all for making that call. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Will you be around for a little bit?
Yes, yes.